The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Maya Chen was elbow-deep in flour when her phone buzzed across the kitchen counter, skittering toward the edge like it wanted to escape whatever news it carried. She caught it with her wrist, a baker's reflex, and left a ghostly white handprint on the screen. You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Stephanie Voss and Daniel Park. Saturday, the 14th of June. She set the phone face down on the counter. Then she picked it up again, because she was not the kind of woman who looked away from things that hurt. She had learned that lesson the hard way, in a hospital room 3 years ago, holding her mother's hand and refusing to close her eyes. Daniel Park. She said his name out loud, quietly, the way you test a bruise, still tender, not devastating. That was something. She was sliding the invitation into the recycling bin. She would not be attending, obviously. She would be washing her hair, reorganizing her spice rack, doing literally anything else on the surface of the earth. When the bakery's front door opened and the bell above it rang its cheerful, indifferent chime. "We're closed," she called, not looking up. "Sign says—" "I know what the sign says." The voice was low, controlled. The voice of a man who was accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him when he spoke. Maya looked up. She recognized him immediately, the way you recognize someone from a photograph. The recognition slightly off-center, slightly delayed, because photographs flatten people, and this man was not flat. He was tall in a way that felt deliberate, dark-haired, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. His eyes were the particular gray of a sky that hasn't decided yet whether it's going to storm. Ethan Zhao, CEO of Zhao Enterprises. His face had been on the cover of Forbes twice in the last 3 years. She had seen those covers in the checkout line at the grocery store and thought vaguely, good for him, the way you think about people whose lives exist in a different atmosphere entirely. He was standing in her bakery, looking at her flour-covered hands, looking at the recycling bin where the corner of a cream-colored envelope was visible, and something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, but she caught it. He had seen the invitation too. "Mr. Zhao," she said, "how can I help you?" "I need a favor. We sell croissants and sourdough. If you need something else, I'd suggest—" "I need a date." He said it flatly, without embarrassment, the way he might say, "I need a quarterly report," or "I need the car brought around." "For a wedding, June 14th. Maya went very still. "Stephanie Voss and Daniel Park," she said. Something crossed his face. "You received an invitation. Apparently we have that in common." She understood then. The shape of it. The particular cruelty of the coincidence. Stephanie Voss had been Ethan Zhao's girlfriend for 2 years. Everyone in their social circle knew the story. Stephanie had left Ethan for Daniel. The whirlwind romance, the engagement announced before the breakup was even cold. And Daniel Park had been Maya's boyfriend for 18 months before that. Before he'd met Stephanie at a charity gala and decided that Maya was, in his words, not where he saw his future going. They were the discarded ones, the leftovers, the exes who had been traded in for each other. It would almost be funny if it didn't ache so specifically. "How do you know about me?" she asked. "I make it my business to know things." He paused. "That sounds more threatening than I intend. You catered the Meridian Foundation gala last spring. Daniel mentioned you." I remembered. "Daniel mentioned you." She could imagine how that conversation had gone. She didn't want to. "And you want to walk into your ex-girlfriend's wedding with her fiancé's ex-girlfriend on your arm," Maya said. "That's not a favor, Mr. Zhao. That's a statement." His mouth did something that was almost a smile. Almost. "Is that a no?" She looked at him. Really looked. And saw something behind the expensive suit and the controlled voice. Something bruised. Something that matched the things she'd felt when she read that invitation. Let me think about it, she said. Now buy a croissant or get out of my shop. She should have said no. She had meant to say no. The word had been right there, fully formed, sitting on her tongue like a lozenge she only needed to spit out. Instead, she had said, "Come back tomorrow at 6. I'll hear you out." Now it was tomorrow at 6, and Ethan Zhao was standing on the other side of her counter again, and Maya was arranging almond croissants on a cooling rack with the focused precision of someone defusing a bomb. "You came back," she said. "You told me to. Most people don't do what I tell them. Most people aren't asking me to attend my ex-girlfriend's wedding." He set a leather portfolio on the counter, and she almost laughed, because of course he had brought documents. Of course this man had turned a social favor into a briefing. "I thought it would help to establish terms." "Terms," she repeated. "Parameters, expectations, whatever word makes this feel less transactional." "None of them do." He opened the portfolio. Inside was a single type page, and she could see bullet points, actual bullet points, and she did laugh then, a short, involuntary sound that seemed to surprise them both. "You drafted a contract. An outline. Contracts require signatures." He slid the page towards her. "I'm proposing a simple arrangement. You attend the wedding with me. We present ourselves as a couple. We are charming, relaxed, visibly happy. We stay for the ceremony, the reception, and exactly 1 hour of dancing. Then we leave. Separately if you prefer." Maya wiped her hands on her apron and picked up the page. His handwriting, because the bullet points were typed, but the margins were full of small, precise annotations in black ink, was surprisingly elegant. She read aloud. "Item 3. No public displays of affection beyond what is contextually appropriate." She looked up. "You quantified appropriate. Hand-holding, one arm around the waist, a maximum of 2 kisses on the cheek." "A maximum." "I didn't want to presume." She set the page down. Through the front window, the last of the evening light was catching the gold lettering on the glass. Chen's, estimated 2019, and throwing it in reverse across the floor. Her mother had helped her pick that font. Her mother had never seen the finished sign. "Why me?" she asked. "You could take anyone. You could take a model, an actress, someone who'd make Stephanie's jaw actually hit the floor." Something shifted behind his eyes. That same almost imperceptible movement she had caught yesterday. A door opening and closing so quickly you could only register the draft. "I don't want to make her jaw hit the floor. I want to walk in and feel like a person, not a headline, not a spectacle." He paused, and for the first time his voice lost its boardroom polish, roughening at the edges like sandpaper worn thin. "You know what it's like? Being the one who got left. You won't perform it. You'll just understand it." The bakery was quiet. The ovens had cooled. Somewhere on the street a car horn sounded, distant and irrelevant. Maya thought about Daniel, about the particular silence of her apartment after he had packed his things, how she had stood in the kitchen and noticed the gap on the shelf where his coffee mug had been, and felt the absence like a missing tooth. She thought about the invitation in the recycling bin. She thought about how she had pulled it out again last night, and read it twice more before throwing it away for good. She picked up a croissant from the cooling rack and set it on a napkin in front of him. "If we're doing this," she said, "there are additions to your outline. First, you try that croissant right now, and you tell me honestly what you think, because I changed the recipe, and I need an opinion that isn't my own. Second, you stop talking to me like I'm a board of directors. Third," she held up 3 fingers, "you tell me the real reason you can't just skip the wedding entirely." Ethan looked at the croissant. He looked at her. Then he picked it up, took a bite, and closed his eyes, and she watched something in his expression crack open. Just barely, just enough. "It's perfect," he said quietly. "That's 1 out of 3. Keep going." The first lesson happened on a Wednesday evening. After Maya had closed the bakery and swept the floors and wiped down every surface twice because she needed something to do with her hands before he arrived. He was late. 7 minutes. She noticed because she had told herself she wouldn't notice, and then she noticed anyway. And then she was angry at herself for noticing, which was at least a more productive emotion than nervousness. When he came through the door, he was wearing jeans. She had not expected jeans. She had expected another suit, another costume of authority. But instead he looked almost ordinary, almost approachable, except for the way he stood in her doorway, like he was waiting for the room to acknowledge him before he entered it. "You're late," she said. "Traffic on the bridge." "There's always traffic on the bridge. That's not an excuse. That's a failure to plan." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one, maybe. The architectural sketch. She had set up a workstation at the long prep table in the back. 2 cutting boards, 2 sets of measuring cups, a stand mixer, and enough ingredients for a simple olive oil cake. She had chosen olive oil cake because it was forgiving, because it didn't require precision so much as patience, and because she suspected Ethan Zhao had never been patient about anything in his life, and she wanted to see what happened when he tried. "We're baking," he said. Not a question. "We're baking. If we're going to convince anyone we've been dating for 3 months, you need to be able to talk about my work like you've actually been inside this kitchen. Like you've tasted things off the spoon. Like you know the difference between bread flour and all-purpose." She handed him an apron. He looked at it the way a man might look at a parachute he wasn't entirely sure would open. "Put it on." He put it on. His fingers fumbled with the ties behind his back, and she watched him struggle for exactly long enough to make a point before she stepped behind him and knotted it herself. Her knuckles brushed the small of his back through his shirt, and he went very still, the kind of stillness that told her he was not accustomed to being touched casually. She filed that away. They baked. She talked him through the measurements, the folding, the particular motion of the wrist that incorporated air without deflating what you'd already built. He listened with an intensity that was almost unsettling. The same focus he probably brought to boardroom negotiations, directed now at the question of whether to use a spatula or a wooden spoon. "Spatula," she said, "always. A wooden spoon is for stirring soup and threatening children." "Is that a professional opinion?" "It's gospel." He was terrible at cracking eggs. Truly, spectacularly terrible. Shell fragments everywhere, yolk on his wrist, a look of genuine bewilderment on his face that made him seem suddenly and disarmingly young. "How?" he said, staring at the wreckage. "It's an egg." "It's not about force. You're treating it like a problem to solve. It's not a problem, it's just an egg. Be gentle with it." He tried again. Still too much force, but less shell this time. Progress. While the cake baked, they sat on opposite stools at the counter, and the kitchen filled with warmth and the smell of citrus and olive oil and something almost like ease. The oven light cast everything amber. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, and there was flour on his jaw, and he didn't seem to know it was there. Or maybe he knew and didn't care, and either possibility interested her. "Tell me something true," she said. "Something I'd know if we were really together." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "I can't sleep," he said. "Most nights. I walk through my apartment, and I count the rooms, and none of them feel like they belong to me." The oven timer hadn't gone off yet. The cake was still rising. "Okay," Maya said softly. "That's a start. The first time they practiced, they got it wrong. Not the facts. They had the facts down cold. Ethan had prepared a dossier, an actual dossier printed and bound like she was a merger he was acquiring. And Maya had read it cover to cover while eating a pain au chocolat, leaving buttery fingerprints on the section about his childhood in Vancouver. She knew his mother's name was Lillian. She knew he took his coffee black. She knew he had broken his collarbone falling off a horse at 12 and had never ridden again, which she found both reasonable and slightly tragic. What they got wrong was the touching. They were in her bakery after hours, the chairs stacked on the tables, the display case dark and empty. Ethan had arrived in a suit, because of course he had, and Maya was still in her work clothes, a dusting of powdered sugar on her left shoulder that she hadn't noticed and he hadn't mentioned. "We should practice proximity," he said, standing 4 feet away from her with his hands in his pockets. He said proximity the way a general might say the Eastern Front. "Proximity," she repeated. "People who are dating stand close to each other. They touch casually. If we look like two strangers maintaining a professional distance, Stephanie will know immediately." Stephanie's that observant? Stephanie once deduced that her assistant was pregnant before the assistant knew, based on the way she was holding her handbag. Maya considered this. "All right, come here." He took 1 step forward, then another. Then he stopped, and she could see the precise moment his composure flickered. Not much, just a tightening around his mouth, a slight stiffness in his shoulders, as though his body was rebelling against the instruction his brain was issuing. She reached out and put her hand on his arm. He flinched. Actually flinched, a full-body microspasm that he controlled almost instantly. But not before she felt it travel through his sleeve and into her fingertips. "Sorry," he said, quietly, not looking at her. "When was the last time someone touched you?" she asked, and then immediately wished she hadn't, because the silence that followed was so complete she could hear the refrigerator humming in the back kitchen. "We should try again," he said. They tried again. She put her hand on his arm, and this time he didn't flinch. But he held himself so rigidly that she might as well have been leaning against a marble column. She moved her hand to his back. He exhaled through his nose, controlled, measured, the breath of a man who had taught himself not to need things. "Ethan. Yes, you have to breathe like a person. I am breathing. You're breathing like a submarine preparing to dive. Breathe like a man who is standing next to a woman he likes." Something shifted in his expression. He looked down at her, and for a moment the mask slipped entirely, and she saw what was underneath. Not coldness, not control, but a vast and exhausting loneliness, so familiar it made her chest hurt. "I don't remember what that feels like," he said. She should have let it go. She should have made a joke, moved on, kept things transactional. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough to smell his cologne, something clean and expensive that made her think of rain on warm stone. And she slid her hand from his back to the space between his shoulder blades and pressed gently. "It feels like this," she said, "like someone is choosing to be near you. Not because they have to be, because they want to." He was quiet for a long time. Then his shoulders dropped, just slightly, and the rigidity bled out of him by degrees, and he stood there in her darkened bakery breathing like a person, and she kept her hand where it was and did not move. Outside, a car passed. The headlights swept across the window and then were gone. "Again tomorrow?" he asked. "Again tomorrow." Lily found her on the bakery steps. Maya was sitting outside during the lull between the morning rush and the lunch orders, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago, when a small hand tugged at her apron. "Are you the croissant lady?" Maya looked down. The girl was maybe 5, with dark hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails and a gap where her left front tooth should have been. She was wearing rain boots despite the sunshine and holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear, dragging it against the sidewalk with the casual violence children reserve for the things they love most. "I am the croissant lady," Maya said. "Are you the rain boots lady?" Lily considered this with tremendous seriousness. "Yes." Behind her, Ethan was coming up the sidewalk at the particular pace of a man trying to look unhurried, while his child had just broken free of his hand and sprinted toward a stranger. His tie was loosened. His hair was slightly less perfect than usual. He looked, Maya thought, almost human. "Lily," he said, "we talked about running ahead." "You talked," Lily said. "I ran." Maya pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. Ethan caught the effort and gave her a look that said he had been on the losing end of this particular dynamic for some time. "I'm sorry," he said. "Her nanny had a family emergency. I have a call in 20 minutes that I can't reschedule, and I was going to ask if we could push our rehearsal to—" "She can stay," Maya said, before she had fully decided to say it. Ethan blinked. It was the first time she had seen him caught off guard, genuinely, without the mask sliding immediately back into place. For a half-second, he looked like a man standing at the edge of something he hadn't expected. "I couldn't ask you to—" "You didn't ask. I offered. There's a difference." She looked down at Lily. "Do you like decorating cookies?" Lily's eyes went wide in a way that answered the question entirely. Ethan crouched down to his daughter's level. The motion was practiced, easy, and something about it made Maya's chest tighten. He spoke to Lily quietly, the way you speak to someone whose opinion matters to you, and Lily nodded and patted his cheek with her small hand and said, "Go do your phone thing, Daddy." He stood. He looked at Maya. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite name, something that lived in the space between gratitude and fear. "I'll be back in an hour. We'll be here." He left. Lily watched him go, then turned to Maya with the swift, emotional pivot only children can manage. "Do you have sprinkles?" "I have 7 kinds of sprinkles. 7 is my favorite number." "Mine too," Maya lied, and held the door open. They decorated cookies. Lily was meticulous in a way that reminded Maya painfully of her mother, who had frosted every cake like she was restoring a fresco. Lily used too much icing and not enough restraint, and asked questions with the relentless precision of a deposition. "Why is your bakery so small?" "Because I'm only one person." "Why don't you have a helper?" "Helpers cost money." "My daddy has money." "Your daddy has his own problems." Lily placed a silver dragée on a sugar cookie with surgical focus. Then, without looking up, "Are you my daddy's girlfriend?" Maya's hand stilled on the piping bag. "No, sweetheart. We're friends." "He doesn't have friends." Lily said this without sadness, just the blunt reporting of fact. "He has people who work for him, and he has me." The words landed somewhere soft and unprotected. Maya thought of Ethan in her kitchen, learning to waltz, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly against her back. She thought of the way he had crouched down to meet his daughter's eyes. "Well," Maya said, "now he has one." Lily looked up at her, assessed her with those grey eyes, so much like her father's, already deciding whether the world would keep its promises. "Okay," Lily said. "Can I have another cookie?" The dress was the color of champagne, and Maya had chosen it because it was the kind of dress that didn't try too hard, which meant she had tried extremely hard to find it. She'd spent 3 hours in a consignment shop on Hawthorne, while Lily sat cross-legged in the dressing room hallway, eating animal crackers and offering verdicts with the brutal honesty only a 4-year-old could sustain. "That one makes you look like a curtain," Lily had said about the first. "That one's pretty but sad," about the second. That one, about the champagne dress and nothing else. Just a nod so solemn it might have been a ruling from the bench. Now Maya stood in the vestibule of the Ashford estate, the June sun throwing long gold rectangles across the marble floor, and Ethan's hand found the small of her back the way it had during rehearsal, except this time his fingers were warm through the silk, and this time neither of them pretended it was choreography. "You look," he started. "Don't say stunning. You'll sound like a press release." The corner of his mouth lifted. "I was going to say terrifying." "Better." They walked in together. She felt the room register them the way a body of water registers a stone. The ripple moving outward, heads turning in sequence, the murmur that wasn't quite whispered enough to qualify as whispering. She kept her spine straight. Ethan's hand stayed where it was, The ceremony was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful. Flawless, curated, every peony and taper candle placed with architectural precision. Stephanie floated down the aisle in a dress that probably required its own insurance policy. Daniel stood at the altar looking exactly the way Daniel always looked when he was getting what he wanted, which was radiant and slightly amazed at his own good fortune. Maya watched him say his vows and waited for the knife twist she'd been bracing against for weeks. It didn't come. What came instead was a strange, clean clarity, like stepping out of a building she hadn't realized she'd been inside. Daniel's voice carried across the garden, earnest and rehearsed, and she heard the words without the old translation running underneath, the one that used to convert everything he said into evidence of what she'd lacked. He was just a man making promises. She hoped he'd keep them. She genuinely, surprisingly hoped that. Beside her, Ethan's jaw was tight. She found his hand between their chairs and pressed her thumb against his knuckle. Once, the way you tap someone's shoulder to say, "I'm here." He didn't look at her, but his hand turned over and his fingers closed around hers, and he held on through the rest of it. At the reception, they danced. Not the way they'd practiced in the bakery kitchen with flour still dusting the floorboards and Lily conducting from her perch on the counter. This was different. The string quartet played something slow and aching, and Ethan pulled her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat through his suit jacket, and it was faster than his face would ever admit. Ethan. This stopped being fake about 3 weeks ago. His hand stilled on her waist. She felt him go quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. A gathering, a held breath, the particular silence of a man deciding whether to let himself fall. "I know," he said. "So what do we do about that?" He pulled back just enough to look at her. Those grey eyes, storm-decided now, certain. "I think," he said slowly, "we stop pretending we're pretending." She kissed him. Right there on the dance floor, in front of the peonies and the taper candles and the two people who had once decided they weren't enough. She kissed him, and he kissed her back with a tenderness so deliberate it almost broke her open. His hand coming up to cradle her jaw like she was something he'd been afraid to want. Somewhere across the room, Lily, smuggled in as the world's smallest +1, whispered to Ethan's mother with absolute satisfaction, "I told you. That one." The cake was wrong. Maya knew it the moment she stepped back from the work table at 4 in the morning, 3 days before the wedding. She had been working on it for hours. The practice tier, the one that was supposed to prove she could execute the design Stephanie had requested through the wedding planner. Because, of course, Stephanie had hired Maya's bakery for the cake, because the universe had a sense of humor that bordered on sadistic. The fondant was flawless. The sugar flowers were precise. And the whole thing was lifeless, mechanical, the work of someone going through motions with her hands while her heart was somewhere else entirely. She sat down on the floor of the kitchen, flour on her knees, and pressed her palms against her eyes. Somewhere else. That was the problem. Her heart was in a living room that smelled like crayons and pine, sitting cross-legged on a rug while a 5-year-old girl explained the political structure of an imaginary kingdom with absolute seriousness. Her heart was standing in a doorway, watching Ethan Zhao read bedtime stories in voices so ridiculous that Lily's laughter became hiccups. Her heart was in a car outside her bakery, in the moment after he'd driven her home from the rehearsal dinner, when he turned to her and said nothing, and the nothing had been so full she'd had to get out before she drowned in it. 3 weeks of pretending. That was the agreement. 3 weeks of his hand on the small of her back, his mouth near her ear at dinner parties, the performance of intimacy so convincing that she had forgotten, somewhere along the way, to stop performing. She had kissed him at the rehearsal. Not the careful, public kiss they had practiced. Something else, something that had started as choreography and ended as confession, and when she'd pulled back his grey eyes had been wide and unguarded and terrified, and she had recognized that terror because she felt it in her own chest, like a second heartbeat. He had not called since. 2 days, no messages, no dry, precise texts about logistics, no photographs of Lily's latest artistic endeavor sent without comment. Just silence, vast and deliberate. The silence of a man who had felt something he did not want to feel and was handling it the way he handled everything, by building a wall so fast you could hear the bricks clicking into place. Maya pulled her hands from her eyes and looked at the cake. She thought about Daniel. How easy it had been, in the end, to let him go. Not because she hadn't loved him, but because the love had been a gentle thing, a house built on flat ground. No risk of falling, no vertigo. She had grieved the loss of companionship more than the loss of him. And that truth had sat in her quietly for months before she'd been willing to look at it. This was not that. This was the edge of something high and real, and Ethan had looked over it and stepped back, and she could not even blame him. He had Lily to think about. He had a daughter who had already lost one woman she'd started to love when Stephanie left, and Maya understood, with a clarity that made her throat tight, that he would burn down anything that might hurt that child again, including this, including her. Her phone buzzed on the counter above her. She stood up, wiped her hands, reached for it with the steadiness of a woman who had learned, in a hospital room 3 years ago, not to look away. It was not Ethan. It was Daniel. "Hey, I know this is strange. Can we talk before Saturday? There are things I should have said a long time ago." Maya read the message twice. She set the phone down gently, the way you set down something that might break. Then she turned back to the cake, scraped away the sugar flowers, and started over. The bakery smelled like cardamom and butter at 4 in the morning, which was the smell of a woman putting herself back together. Maya had not slept. She had driven home from the wedding with her shoes off, and her hair still half-pinned, and the taste of champagne going sour at the back of her throat, and she had walked past her bed without looking at it, changed into her whites, and come downstairs to the kitchen because the kitchen had never lied to her. The kitchen had never told her she was not where it saw its future going. The kitchen had never asked her to be a prop in someone else's story, and then been surprised when she turned out to be a person. She was making quinoa. It was the hardest thing in her repertoire. Laminated dough, sugar caramelizing at the edges, the whole thing requiring a kind of brutal patience that left no room for thinking about anything else. You had to fold and turn and fold and turn, and if your hands were shaking or your mind was somewhere else, the butter would break through the layers and the whole thing would collapse into something greasy and flat and ruined. Her hands were not shaking. She folded. She turned. She folded again. The thing about the wedding, the thing she had not let herself feel while she was standing in that garden watching Stephanie and Daniel promise each other forever, was that she was glad. Not glad for them exactly, though she supposed she wished them well in the distant way you wish well to strangers on an airplane. She was glad for herself. She was glad she had gone. She was glad she had worn the green dress and eaten the salmon and danced once with Ethan and once by herself. And she was glad that when Daniel had found her near the bar and said, with that particular softness he used when he wanted to seem like a good person, that he hoped there were no hard feelings. She had looked at him and said, honestly, that there weren't. Because there weren't. That was the revelation. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness implied something owed and collected, a transaction, and she was done with transactions. It was simply that the bruise, when she pressed it, was gone. The flesh was whole. She had not noticed the exact moment it healed, because she had been busy living, which was, she supposed, how healing worked. The dough was ready for its final turn. She pressed her palms into it, feeling the cool resistance, the butter and flour holding their architecture. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She did not look at it. It buzzed again. She looked. I owe you an apology. Several, probably. Can I buy you coffee? Not as a transaction, just as a person who behaved badly and knows it. Ethan. She read the message twice. She thought about the last time she had seen him, at the reception. His face when she had told him she was not a shield and not a sword and not a prop. The way he had opened his mouth and then closed it. The way he had looked, for the first time since she'd known him, like a man who did not know what to say. She set the phone down. She slid the kouign-amann into the oven and set the timer and stood there in the warm dark of her kitchen. 4:15 in the morning. The city still asleep outside her windows. She picked the phone back up. I don't drink coffee. I'm a baker. We drink tea like civilized people. Also, you can't buy it. I'll make it. The bakery opens at 7. Asterisk. She put the phone down for the last time. Through the oven door, she could see the dough beginning to rise, the sugar beginning to turn, the layers holding, each one distinct, each one doing exactly what it was supposed to do. She washed her hands. She tied her apron tighter. She turned on the lights in the front of the shop one by one, and by the time the sun came up, she was ready.